In this video, I'm going to be starting doing some work on the kids' video game room here in the basement. And the first thing I do is frame out this corner plumbing. It goes up to a toilet on the main floor bathroom, and there's also a sink that kind of comes off to the right. I am going to have to put in an access panel so you can still get access to the main pipe. And I'm going to have to do some framing around the pipe that goes to the sink. Now, overall, this thing is about 16 inches from the wall in one direction. And in the other direction, it's about 13 inches from the wall, give or take. So I am going to frame this out 16 by 13. Now there is drywall on the wall. It probably would have been better to have the drywall not on the wall and do the drywall after, but because it's already there, I'm just going to leave it as is. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut some 16-inch pieces, and I always run with a double top plate when I'm doing framing in this basement. Not so much because it is stronger and it does make for a stronger wall, I think. It's just also easier to notch out that top plate if it's a double top plate, and then you don't have to worry about coming too close or weakening your one single top plate too much. So I do prefer the double top plate. And what I'm going to do is mark the upper top plate because I do have some copper plumbing and it does hang lower than the floor joist. So I'm going to notch that out with my circular saw. I got like a little micro circular saw, and I'm not going to overthink this. I'm going to do a pretty substantial cut on it, about that deep, and that's fine because, like I said, this is not going to be a load-bearing wall in any way. It's just there to hold up some drywall, and not very much drywall at that. So I will do some pretty aggressive notching here, and I'm just taking the circular saw, going on those lines that I've marked out where the plumbing's going to be, and then I'm going to take a hammer and a chisel and use that chisel to pry out those pieces that I have cut. And then I'll smack them out with the hammer, and I will clean it up a little bit with the chisel and the hammer, and I do most of it off camera. For the treated wood, I do use cut and seal on the ends. It might be overkill. The basement's dry. It's never been moist. It's a very, very dry basement for some reason, but I do use the cut and seal to seal up ends. Even though cut and seal says it's for outdoor use only, I still use it in the basement. Now, the next thing I do is measure the height. In this case, it's about 81 inches, give or take. Now, because I find the floor of the basement here kind of isn't necessarily perfectly level, I do take a few measurements and just make sure that it's the same on one end or the other, and that'll ensure that the wall isn't too low on one of the ends. So I'll just take the circular saw and I will do some quick cuts and cut the wall studs to the correct height. Now, I do use screws and nails when I make the wall. Because I don't have a nail gun, I find that the screws hold everything together better, and just when you try to nail these things without the screws there, I find that the boards move around too much. So not really necessary, but I do find that it makes for a pretty strong wall. And for the treated stuff, I do use treated lumber approved screws and nails. For the screws and nails that go into the untreated board, I just use screws and nails that don't have the ACQ rating. So they do look different. The ones that go into untreated wood are a little bit more shiny, and then the ones for the treated wood are hot dip galvanized, and they have a bit of a duller finish to them. So they're pretty obvious. You can just look at them and tell the difference. And like I said, I do one screw, holds everything together, and then while I'm nailing it, things don't fall apart. And obviously you need to add some screws for the top plate to make sure that that's held in place. But I am going to put a 4-inch screw up and through it anyway. So that'll also ensure that the second top plate is well secured. And like I said, I do use 2 nails in the bottom as well. These ones are obviously approved for treated lumber, and that's it. Now, to secure it to the floor, I find it's easier to secure it to the floor first. Then I can make sure that the walls are plumb. And I also screw through and into the bottom plate on the perimeter wall to ensure that it doesn't move around as well. And because I haven't painted the basement wall yet, I could also tell where I put in the fire blocking, so I could also screw this into the fire blocking. Once I've got this bottom secured, I'll just make sure that it's plumb in all directions, and I'll take one of those 4-inch screws and I'll put it through the double top plate and then into the floor joist above it. And I have 2 of those, and I just jam those in. And definitely those 4-inch construction fasteners really hold things together well. And I do have fire blocking in the wall, so I also put screws in the middle through the drywall and into the fire blocking on the back side of it. Now, this one I'm not going to be able to do the double top plate because there is the plumbing for the sink. So for the bottom, I fastened it the same way. And then for the top plate, there is no top plate. It's going to be about a foot from the top, and that'll accommodate the plumbing. So this one's going to go right there, and I'm going to screw in through the sides of the stud instead of in through the top. And that'll allow me to slide it into place and to accommodate the space for the plumbing for the sink. Now, I found the boards I bought were pretty bowed out, but that's okay. I use some clamps to hold them in place, and then I use a whole bunch of construction screws to secure it to the first piece that I put in. And this is what it looks like when I've secured it to the wall. You can see that I've screwed again through the drywall and into the fire blocking. I've screwed it into the top plate up top and the bottom plate on the bottom. I didn't shoot a nail through the bottom. I don't really like shooting nails into the floor too close to the plumbing because I don't want to cause a leak. And then you can see I put a ton of screws in to make sure that that bowed out board is nice and flush with the other board. And then I put, it's not going to be for electricity, it's going to be for internet. It's going to have a Cat 6 in it, but I added some 2x4 pieces in there just to hold the outlet box in place. And then, like I said, I'm going to put the Cat 6 stuff in later. Now for the top piece to conceal the plumbing for the sink, I just measure that out a little bit past the plumbing. And I do need a 2x3 in this area. The 2x4 was too big, it wouldn't fit in there, so I use a 2x4 on one side and a 2x3 on the other side. I cut them at about 34 inches, and then I need to make them about 4 inches down from the joist. So I cut a few small pieces of 2x4, and I'll screw all those together. And then I also use 2x2 in this process. So I'm pretty much just building a ladder, and the bottom side of the ladder is going to be just a 2x2. You could do this with only 2x2s, but I do find that the 2x2 sort of splits if you're using too many screws to them. So by having the 2x4s or the 2x3s, it does allow you to put a lot more screws in and make for a more solid framing around the plumbing. And the bottom, this is just going to be 2x2s, and really all it needs to do is hold drywall up. So it doesn't have to be crazy strong. You could just use 2x4s for this as well. That would be totally acceptable. But like I said, I think the 2x2 is more than enough to hold up drywall. And for most of this framing, it's a very small piece of drywall. So that's what everything looks like when I'm done. Like I said, there's a 2x3 on one side, and that's because the plumbing was close to the wall, so I couldn't use a 2x4. And then on the front side, I'm just using a 2x4. Now I did need some bar clamps to do this. It is difficult when you're working by yourself. You can see that I've clamped a level onto the first piece of framing that I put in, and that's just to make sure that this framing box that I put on is actually straight. And when I put the drywall on, it's not going to be at a strange angle, causing everything to look weird. And really I'm just firing some regular construction screws into the framing I put in and then up into the floor joists. I do add a few extra pieces of 2x4 in here, and that's mainly to get the access panel so that it's not floppy. And then I do add the 2x4s in the middle, and really that's just to be able to screw into it where the drywall pieces are going to have a seam. And the access panel is going to fit right there. So I don't like doing drywall. I'm pretty slow at it, so I'm going to do that off camera. And this is what it looks like once I've screwed the drywall on. So like I said, I've boxed it up top, concealed that upper plumbing, and then down below you can see that I've got the Cat 6 in, and then I've got the access panel for the plumbing. And now I got a whole bunch of modding to do. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.